Validating properties is probably the most important thing when you're creating components that are going to be used by others and even yourself as you look at components you didn't touch for a long time. So the more validators you have, the better. And in this lecture, we're going to learn on the built-in way you could add those type of validations that would only trigger overhead in the development version of React. Alright, let's continue and fulfill our promise from the last lecture. And really what we want to do is we want to create some validation of content to be able to give an error if the content is not valid. And to do that, the most easy way to do that, and by the way, this errors will only appear in development, not in production, which is really wonderful. It's only in the development version of React. If we go ahead into our element that we want to, let's say we want to validate our text footer to make sure that the title that's coming in is of a certain type and that the content coming in here is of a certain type. Now, the way we would do that is learn another new ES6 thing. Now, generally speaking, in ES6, there is no way to just add properties directly. There's no this dot whatnot, excusez-moi, this dot whatnot. The way you would do that is create a constructor, which we've done that already previously a few times, and add into the properties by creating the constructor. And let me see if we should have a constructor already created, maybe in the header, maybe in the portfolio. There we go. So in our constructor, we just created those properties. So those were properties of our class. Now, how do you create a static property? There's two main ways to do that. One way to do that in ES6 is if I wanted to create a static property, I could, after the creation of the class that has a name, I could go and say text footer version equals 1.01. Let's say. Whenever I would want to refer to that text input version, I would just call the full qualified name. So I would do a console.log, and then just output that version. Our text is version. And if I go ahead and run it, we'll see that we'll get here in our output that our text version is and that property name. So that is our static property that belongs to the class overall. Now for React to react to the components that we're creating in ES6, we need to send in a static property with the name of prop types. Now, I'm going to show you another way of doing it besides setting it after the creation of the component right inside. Now, in ES6, this is how we would do it. I would start with the declaration of static. Now, I cannot create properties directly. So instead of that, I'm going to create a getter, and I'm going to go ahead into my prop types, which is the item that I want to create, and I'm literally creating that method, and I'm going to return the item that I want to return. So in this case, I'm creating a static. It's going to be accessible through textfooter.proptypes, and then here I would send in the value that is expected by the component. Okay, now by the way, setters work the same way. So in this case, I'm getting that value, but if I wanted to set a value that's inside, I would call it set and then use a function to do so. Okay, but in our case, we're only going to address a getter, and in this stage, I really just want to get a value. And this value doesn't have to be built inside, so I'm just going to create a getter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out the variables, such as the title that I have here, and also we're going to do the content that we're expecting from the properties. And then I'm just going to go to my react.prop in uppercase types, the type that I want. There's quite a lot of different types. For example, I'm going to do number. Now, number is going to make sure that the value of title must be a number. Now, what's going to happen is because I've set these prop types, if I run my application again, we're going to get an error. And if we find that error, we're rendering a component, though that's fine. And here we go, failed prop, invalid prop, blah, 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 blah. It's expecting a number, but it got a text footer, blah, 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 blah. But in our case, we really want to send text here, so I'm going to make sure that this is a string. Now I'm going to go ahead and also for our content, I want to declare that I want to make sure that this is actually a visible item or an item that could be visible. And to do that, I'm going to call here node. And node per se says that whatever value I'm getting here could be outputted directly onto the stage, because with our text footer, that's exactly what we're doing. We're rendering it. We're assuming that the content is rendable. Now, if I go ahead and I save this and go back into my application and look at the values that I'll get here, first of all, I'm not getting any errors because really all the values that I'm sending are rendable. But beyond that, if I send now, for example, and I activate our this.props for our item here that is not going to be valid because we have there an array that we're sending in, then this time around we're also going to get an error that will help our developers that are working. We're getting an error telling us, by the way, you've been sending here not sending what we're expecting into the content. So it's making it a lot easier for developers to then understand what is the error that they need to address and they need to take care of. So that is in essence how you work with those validators. Now I want to show you just one more because there's a lot of different types of validators. What would happen in a situation where you would want your text, for example, in the title to be or a type string or a number, but nothing but that? Now the way you would do that is, and I'm going to go ahead here and just start up another prop types. This time I'm going to call a method of one of, and it expects an array. By the way, one of is a method as well. We could list out exactly the values you expect, but in this case I want a one of type. And I'm going to go ahead and then send an array, and that array will have a string, and that array could have also, let's say, a number. And I could close that baby up, close that array up, close that bracket up, put a comma because we're done with it. And then it's going to validate that it could be or a string or a number. In this case, everything should continue working. So once we go through our refresh, let's see if we have here an error. What is our error? Default props one of types, not function. That is because it's one of type, not one of types. One of type, save, refresh, and okay, let's see. Warning, failed property, invalid property. Right, why is it failing? Because in our item below right here, we're still sending in values that are not valid. So let me go ahead here and just not put anything in. Just for this one, we'll put it empty. And if we run it, we'll see that now everything is running again. In the next lecture, we're going to go back into that one less item that's left here, and I'm going to put it back so that error will appear, and then figure out how do we render it and render that variation of it, which, by the way, would not be a text input, but we would want to use our complex text footer and obviously change the logic here so this logic is dynamic as well. But for now, let me go ahead here and I'll just put in our complex footer that really just to put that item there. And in the next lecture, we'll turn this baby into something dynamic as well. In this lecture, we saw how to validate development properties to give more feedback for the developers that are working with our components. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about more dynamic things because really everything is about making content dynamic.